So much for joining us once again on a Friday afternoon when perhaps you have some things to do. You choose your lunch with us. So thank you very much for joining the Modern Job Search Checklist. My name is Mark, and below is my co-host, as always, Damian Birkel. How are you, sir?
I'm fine, thank you. Glad to be here as always.
Good deal. And joining us today from the hills of, well, maybe not from the hills of Tennessee, but from from the mid states, Deborah Ann Matthews, my old buddy. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Hi, y'all.
Yes. And today we're trying to bring you a show that's going to help you impress employers. I hope that if you're in the chat, you'll join us. We stream out always to YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and of course, LinkedIn, one of our favorite spots. So a lot of the action will happen anywhere and everywhere that you are watching the show. So feel free to say hi to us in the chat, join in on our conversation. And as always, we will always interrupt what we're doing to help you what you need us to do. So thank you very much again for joining us. And just to let you know, as a show note, we will not be here next Friday because that'll be Thanksgiving weekend. So we'll be taking a break and we'll be back in a couple of weeks. And I guess Damien will be back any moment. Uh, so we'll go ahead and there he is. We'll go ahead and get started. Uh, I saw an article and I think I shared it with you guys, and we don't have to necessarily
Mm-hmm.
go through the article, but there's some
Mm-hmm.
organizations that kind of rethinking the whole hiring process. And you guys, you all probably know. I try not to say you guys because one of us is not a guy, but you all probably know that every fabric of the workplace and every fabric of the hiring process is going to be tested in some way, shape, or form. So, Deborah Ann, we're going to start with you as to what do you think about a resume-less hiring process?
A resume-less hiring process. You know what? I think every few years we have this discussion. And at my last Career Thought Leaders Conference, I actually videoed my colleagues and I asked the question, so what about this resume? And even
Mhm.
back in 2005 and 2012 and 2016, people were saying nobody wants to deal with a resume. But the truth is that resumes will be obtained in different ways. They may tweet, they may text you, they may even video you. But because we have equal opportunity where we need to make sure that every group of people, from natives to blacks to African Americans to Africans to Egyptians to Hispanics to Asians, have an equal opportunity to apply for jobs, then we will have to always have some type of paper that establishes that you have about the job, number one, and number two, your credentials can be evaluated to see which type of skills and experiences can help us to meet that goal. So there'll be them resumes on some level, even if it may go to a half of a piece of paper as opposed to 2 or 3 page resumes where we just need the
Mhm.
last 5 years or the last five accomplishments or achievements that directly relate to that job. So, and so it'll vary, and based on the industries, they're always changing things too, and that's a good thing. Some industries are slow to change, but those who know best are changing
All
to
right.
accommodate the market.
Good thoughts. I like that. Very well assessed. Damien.
Mm-hmm.
Um, my feeling very similar. But if you think about it, a resume is the only colorblind way to communicate your career accomplishments. If you go to LinkedIn, you have a picture. If you have a website, you usually have a picture, and that's fine. And LinkedIn has almost become the new resume. But
Hmm.
I think depending on the company, depending on the industry, and believe it or not, depending on the age of the majority of the people that are running the company, I think the
Mm-hmm.
resume is going to be around here for a while. It may change, get shorter, whatever, but I think that it is deeply ingrained in the hiring process, and I think for the near future, anyways, some type of resume is going to remain as a part of the hiring process. Because if you think about it, if you're interviewing, especially with an upper level management person, they're not going to go to their computer and call up your LinkedIn profile and read it. They're more likely to have a your resume that's kind of down and off to their left as they're talking to you, because it's still the fastest way to learn about a person. So my feeling is it's not going to go away.
Okay. All right. Uh, I kind of take in between, but there's some thoughts I think that we need to consider. One is that already our pictures and things are on the web along with our career if we're using LinkedIn.
Hmm.
So for a lot of people, they're thinking, well, what else there is to need? Well, kind of recruiters and employers control that because they like having control from beginning to the end of the process. That's part of the problem, I think, with the resume process is that they want to control it so they can control who's seen and who's not being seen. And a lot of
Yes.
it won't be necessarily by facing more. However, there are companies that are bringing up this topic. It is not particularly, it's not people who are writing resumes or career coaches or people in the career field. It are companies who are saying, I'm tired of going through this process, and this process takes up a lot of time and space. So they're going to figure out a way to get rid of that process because of the time and space that it takes. So I think there will be companies that will begin to part ways with the traditional and figure out that there are better ways to do it, especially everything's digital now. They can know who you are before you even apply,
Yes.
really, if they want to go that direction.
Hmm.
And there are tools to do that. There are also tools to bring to segment out someone's gender, color, or any other type of biases. If you look at this app in a company called Blendor, that is led by African African American woman. I can't get together here, but the point being is that the whole object is to segment out gender bias, race bias, etc. So already we're kind of teetering there. It'd be interesting to see. Like I've always said, big tech companies are just copycat companies, basically. They follow whoever big. So Google, Microsoft, Twitter, or somebody like that who are large decides, okay, we're doing it with the resumes. This is what we're going to do. And all the rest are going to follow. It's going to be a little bit interesting to see how everybody acts because I think the tool for bias has been on the side of employers, being that they can control who's seen and they're the gatekeepers and they can dismiss you and use automation to save them time. But tech companies have figured out that there is a better way to segment out without even going through the traditional application process. So yeah, I think it's going to come in between both. Deborah, I see you smiling, and you got some things to say. So I'm gonna go ahead and let you have the floor.
Yes. We just had our resume conference in September, which we do annually, and we talked about just this thing. And part of it is a whole lot of talent still is not on LinkedIn. But the manufacturing, the laborers are starting to join LinkedIn. But I think that the bigger picture, whether we're going to have a resume list society, is how can companies find talent? So that's like the problem. So the resume is a tool, but what is happening is they have they're forced to contend with what we have. We have a cell phone society. Even I just took me a picture for the gram. with
Mm-hmm.
us right now because I do
Mm-hmm.
that. I take a picture of my food, but because I've worked in a traditional workforce, I can acclimate between the new workforce and the old school workforce. But the new workforce, they value their leisure time and their vacation time and being excitable about what's going on in their whole life. So
Mm-hmm.
industry is forced to deal with that because they don't automatically feel like they need to be there. So
Okay.
I think that what we talked about in conference was when I like when my man said colorblind way to communicate accomplishments. What we have been talking about in our resumes, how do we make our resumes less biased? And one way we do that is we no longer put addresses on the resume because we don't
Right.
want people to discriminate because of where you live. And in
Mm-hmm.
some instances, some people are getting big city phone numbers so that they won't be discriminated for living in a smaller town
Mm-hmm.
because the person who is biased is that person, that industry. The reason there's not a lot of diversity and there's not a lot of diversity of talent is the industry typically, they say people, well, when I was in college, they said people pick people who are like them. But now we know that when you have a different and rich body of different opinions, that makes the organization better. So they are interested. And one of the sales HR people out of New York told us they literally will call someone and say, "Hey, can you upload your resume again? Because we want to make sure we got it because the applicant tracking system didn't get it correctly."
Mm-hmm.
So the tools, I guess a machine is a machine, but you still need that body of people. So whether they go in as subcontractors, full-time employees, annual employees who come in to, during the season or what have you, how do you get that person or those bodies that you need to do the job is the issue. That's what we're talking about. And in
Mm-hmm.
my community, I live in Middle Tennessee, and the southern states are great places for big business to come because we have a history of people who are used to working, who are used to going to work in big companies like warehouses, large types of places. But we still have a 12 to 24 people who do not come to work every single day, even among jobs that pay 12, 19 to $24 an hour.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're looking at the talent, how do we get the talent? I worked for Job Corps my entire career up until last year, pretty much. And one of the things we taught our 16 to 24-year-olds, and I think this speaks to the resume list society that we're talking about, we taught them employability skills. So yes, we need this talent. How do we find them? And then how do job seekers prepare their resumes to be found? How do they prepare themselves to be found?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
they are indeed doing like TikTok resumes and LinkedIn and bios and videos and portfolios, and we do 30, 60, 90-day plans. So there's lots of things you can do to help an employer see your skills. You can even do a little dance to demonstrate if it's an artsy career field.
Mm-hmm.
But because every company receives federal money or state money on some level, whether it's the bonding insurance from people who have backgrounds, whether it's a tax incentive to hire people who are coming out of welfare to work, or whether it's our nursing staff, we pay for them to take those exams because we have a nursing shortage, or whatever the case may be. So because that happens, the Department of Labor demands that every company regulates and systemizes their process. So they have to be fair. They have to reach out to those who are from a lower socioeconomic background or older, but who still can work and fit the criteria. They have to be fair. So the one way that they know how to do that right now is through the resume.
Right.
Does
Mm-hmm.
that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, that's
Yes.
understood. And I think I don't think we don't disagree, or I
Mhm.
don't at
Yeah.
all disagree with an actual process.
Right.
However, I will say that again, once companies start to say, this is how you're going to apply, you know what?
Yes.
This is how you're going to apply. and that's really going to be it. I mean, all the other questions are going to be answered, and really, in short, companies will basically even go find you before you even apply and keep their eyes out on you with the intelligence that they have and the way the digital monitoring tools that are available right now. They're only going to become more sophisticated.
Oh yeah.
And sometimes it may even take just a conversation on video eventually, being that video is going to be able to be read via Google because it's going to be transcribable. If we had a conversation like this and said, "I think I want to apply to Google," that could be picked up by Google, and
Oh yeah.
you could be headhunted.
Very
So
much so.
I think we think of the old, but if we cut out the old way completely, it can be done. Is it practical? Is it financially savvy to do it that way? It remains to be seen. And I think those are
Yes.
questions that we're kind of looking at right now. But I think this is a very interesting discussion because that changes the way that job seekers will need to put forth their efforts. They're going to have to put forth their efforts in a digital manner more so than they will relying on paper and past accomplishments of what they did and what they have in their briefcase. If it's not online, you are not really a candidate,
Right.
much less exist. Damien?
Right. And there really is a digital divide when
Hmm.
it comes to employment and applying for unemployment. One of the things that I've noticed the most with the with COVID-19 is I run a support group for the unemployed and the underemployed, and there has been a huge cleave, like right down the middle. The people that were comfortable with technology continued participating in the organization. Those that were uncomfortable with technology and Zoom stopped. And when I inquired why, one person said, "I don't want technology coming into my living room."
Yeah.
And I too live in a southern state. Actually, your next door neighbor in North Carolina,
Oh wow. Yes.
uh, and agree with you about everything that you're saying. Actually, both. I mean, this is a very energetic conversation, and so right on point. But one of the things that I was thinking about, we have this huge furniture company that took over one of the Haynes factories, and there's always a sign out, we're hiring, and I keep watching the hourly rate tick up, 12, 15. Now it's $19 an hour, and kind of what I thought about, Mark, when you were talking about um, uh, applications and digital and everything else, is
Hmm.
the majority of the workers that are filling these positions are displaced textile workers.
Hmm.
And when I did the layoff with the 5,000 people at Sara Lee, the bulk of the people were laborers, is kind of a terse term. They worked in the factories, and they are averse to technology, to LinkedIn, et cetera. My point being is that I think that the digital divide also impacts hiring practices,
Yes.
and that if you are working in a factory, about the only degree of technicality, for lack of a better term, is having somebody help you either input your application that's usually online, and or somebody, a daughter, a son, aunt, uncle, whatever, help you put together a rudimentary resume. And so there's this whole group of people that just by their very nature are excluded from LinkedIn and everything else. And I was just wondering what you guys thought. Is the resume kind of the great equalizer with employers, knowing that there is a huge amount of Americans that are divided technologically, that may or may never catch up with where we're going because of the digital divide? What do you both think?
Well, I want to share this with you. Those who are not as familiar, and they may not make as much money, or they may work in the trades, and also those who have very important positions, make a lot of money, do a lot of traveling for the company, bring them a lot of revenue. They both are facing the same challenge. Job seekers have a lot of challenges meeting industry standards for getting application.
Yeah.
And I literally have been copying and pasting in my Facebook pages in my city all the people who say, I'm looking for a job. I've been applying for jobs for 4 months, no response from employers. I've been doing this, no response. Or they'll say, I'll take a job here. And those efforts that they're making have nothing to do, or very little to do, with their understanding of what the industry wants them to do to make application. So when you say resume-less society, there are actually no rules to resumes. As much as we go to resume conferences, I buy resume books, I take resume seminars, I get resume certifications. There are no rules, but there's still an issue with even people who make, a lot of money, or who are very busy because they are good at what they do for a living. They don't have to focus on getting a job as much until they don't have one or want another one. But
Mhm.
following directions is a whole different ball of wax. And most of the time, a lot of jobs will have a assessment, or if it's a federal job, they'll have questions that you have to answer. You'll have to know that if it's a federal job, there's some different requirements to apply that the resume needs to have. If it's a state job, there are going to be some different ones. Even if it's a trade job, they do give welders, they give a test before you can even apply. So that's a whole different kind of thing. But even when I live in a military town, even when the military work with the career people there, they come to see me because if you've been a truck driver, even if you've been a sergeant, you can follow directions, you can understand it, but you can't really do it because it's not what you do. And so there'll always be a need for us to help. So that's where you'll find companies setting up in the mall, going to the high schools, setting up whether it's shopping or going to a festival, just to kind of help communicate to people. We're looking for jobs in sales. We're looking for jobs among welders. We're looking for painters. We're looking for executives, because they need to branch out to reach the people where they are.
Yes.
Because even though you have your cell phones, this does not mean that you're savvy with your computer, you're savvy with software. This means you're on your cell phone, mostly playing games, and you're not following directions because, they're not. And also, computer companies, they get savvy with the software, but those computer guys are just doing different things because they don't have nothing else to do. But the person who is the end user is still confused. So that gets back to following directions and understanding. And then you have to call or send an email when you don't understand. And your young people, your young professional under 35 may or may not do that. They may, or over 55 may or may not do that. May or may not feel like doing that, if that makes
Well,
sense.
well, I'm sorry. Go ahead, finish. Go ahead, finish your
No, that's
sentence. I'm
all. No,
sorry.
that was all I was saying. If that makes sense, yeah.
It makes sense, and but I think what we're up against is already there's a bias against those who the haves and the have-nots.
Oh,
Those
very
who
much
are,
so.
from anywhere from having digital access to good Wi-Fi to not having so good Wi-Fi, and also the pay is also there's that bias and there's that divide.
Mhm.
As far as the well-paying jobs, the white collars, manufacturing jobs, not so much. And they
Mhm.
depend on where they are. So the manufacturing jobs are all over, and there are some very good manufacturing jobs. But I think the perception is that if you work for Google, your salary is a whole lot better on the average than if you work for Kellogg. Having said that, having said that, I think again we're talking about resume lists, and we're talking about each company having their own way of applying, and
Yes.
really industry. how the industry, because they're copycats. So if Google and Twitter go one way, John Deere and Kellogg may go a whole nother way.
Mhm.
And you've got to be able to adjust to all of that. But
Okay.
also you got to think how the company's going to find people and the way that companies are going to find people. There are a lot more companies that are willing to send a recruiter out and send them on LinkedIn and start to poach somebody whose head is down and working very hard at their job, that they just have a LinkedIn profile and probably nothing else because they have their head down and say, hey, we've got a better job over here. And believe it or not, even the technology is even better. Why don't you just at least come look? Then all of a sudden that changes the game entirely. So,
Mhm.
I think the other addition to that is we have the aspect of people going to become more 1099 employees in
Absolutely.
the future. So, therefore, applying for a job may not necessarily be something that they would have to do through an application process, but through a bidding process. Then we're really talking about brand reputation because that person is the brand. So they'll be able to appeal that way because they have a website, they have all these things to market themselves. Therefore, they truly become the business. It's something that we've been telling job seekers, and both of you guys have been, because I've known you for that long, for years, that you say you are the business of one. You are the brand, and you need to be that way because soon you won't have a choice. We've come that much closer to it. And I think that's really the big difference now, to where companies say, we may not need all this paper and pomp and circumstance. We got ways to find out who the best candidate, because that candidate has great work. If you work for Twitter, Google, Microsoft, LinkedIn is just right next door in a literal sense of the next company you want to work for, because that's the way your career is shown. Now, if you want to work for a manufacturing company and help them usher in, you might be attracted to them too. But I think those things need to be considered overall. Does that answer your question, Damien, overall?
Yeah, it does. I do have a question though, not related to what we're talking about. Is it just me on my end? But I keep hearing music coming in and going out, and coming in and going out. Uh,
It's probably
Oh,
Deborah.
yes,
Deborah, Ann, you got
we're
music.
playing smooth jazz
ah,
because, like we say, in my world, we listen to music. So I
Uh,
had Alexa is giving me a little bit of smooth jazz. Is it
okay.
ah,
bothering you?
Yeah. Well, it's
I can
coming
turn it
through.
off.
It's coming through, and Lord knows
Okay,
we won't get
Alexa,
in trouble for
stop. Alexa,
we
Alexa,
won't get in trouble for copyright. But I know I love
Alexa,
music.
stop. Alexa, stop. Alexa's hard headed. Alexa,
Yeah,
stop.
yeah, I know. We have Alexa too, and Alexa can do what she wants to do at times.
Oh yes.
And there's my bias. I call her. She is a she voice, but nevertheless,
Well, Samuel also is on there, so Samuel he'll turn it off too.
uh, yeah,
there we go.
the expletives might come through on there. So yeah, we got to
Oh,
tame Samuel to the more private industry. But anyway,
oh my
so yeah,
goodness.
great discussion. I think this is something we're going to probably end up bringing up in the future as it begin to develop. But this is the first time I've heard companies come out and said, "Okay, this is getting tiring. We're going to have to do something else besides a resume in the traditional sense." And you're right, Deborah, and you're going to have some kind of resume. Probably we all have, in essence, whether we like it or not, we all have a digital resume. And if you
Mhm.
don't have a digital resume, you don't exist.
Right.
Is
You know,
something.
Mark, I've been writing notes. I just had an interview with Executing Black Business,
Uh-huh.
and they were surprised when I was telling them that there actually are different kinds of resumes that exist. And I think that we need to say that to people, because probably in as much as they were surprised, most people may be surprised that different resumes exist, and based on your industry, they're going to need something other than a resume anyway. I did some resumes for some high-end pharmaceutical companies, which are those companies
Mhm.
you see who are advertising all those drugs on TV, and
Right.
for promotion, what you do is you give your colleague a bio, and then let's say, have them meet me for lunch and bring their resume. So sometimes they're going to need something else other than the resume anyway, based on the industry. And then based on the industry, they may need a 300-word bio, a 600-word bio, a half a sheet bio, or a whole sheet bio based on what it is they're trying to do. If you're in public relations, if you're in corporate communication, if you're in journalism, it's just going to vary. But I wanted to speak about the things that industries are doing to help job seekers, and they're doing what's a checklist. So literally they're going to give you, when they go out to job fairs and the mall and at the career centers and at the military career centers and at the Goodwill Career Solutions Center and the Salvation Army and the Urban League and the just all of these different wonderful organizations that help people with securing jobs. Operation Stand Down, they're going to have a checklist. And then I look back here, they're going to give things like this with little websites that you can go and look them up, or little arm braces with reminders. Excuse me. They're also going to say, if you need help, excuse me, we have reasonable accommodations. Now that's going to really help people who are in the field, who have been welders and who've been corporate managers. A lot of managers are still hands-on pencil paper people, but reasonable accommodations will someone will sit with you and help you. Also, for youth and young adults, every state has a youth oriented program, and youth goes to under 25. So in Tennessee, it's
Wow.
called Youth Can. And remember, I'm going to tell you why that is. Remember back when they allowed people in college to remain on their parents' insurance
Yep.
till 24. And all monies that direct to youth go from 14 to 24. Job Corps, AmeriCorps, Peace Corps, all of those corps that are run by the Department of Labor, Youth Services, and then your senior workers. We have several senior worker programs. That's going to be age 55 and above. So that's a support group. You have Welfare to Work, which are people who are husbands or men or women who are parents. So they're going to help them to get to work. So there's that support. You have people who are disabled people in their high schools, whether they're autistic or have a physical disability or mental disability that you may not be able to see. They have, so that's a group. Then you have people who are just in society. You have a disability. We have the Ticket to Work program. You have your veteran support programs. You have your support programs for spouses. You have your support programs for reentry. Also, like Johnson and Johnson, they give each of their employees $6,000 a year for professional development, and that includes your resumes and your job search, because they want you to stay there with them as opposed to go to another company. So let us help train you within the company to go someplace else. So
Mm.
you have all these different things that the industry is doing.
Yeah, there is. But you know something interesting, and I don't know if you guys noticed this or not. Um, I looked one time when we were in the middle of the pandemic, and people were hurting because they were losing jobs. Their jobs were in jeopardy. They were being cut hours, and I'm sorry for the ringing that's going on here. There was a lot going on. You know something? A lot of the one-stop connections, a lot of the places where where you talked about, Deborah, they were missing from the digital conversation as far as giving advice for jobs.
Yes, and
And
that's, yeah, that
and I'm going to suggest to a great degree that those industries are going to have to rethink the way that they are doing business, because they were, I mean, other than the career stop, the national one stop career stop, whatever that, I forgot the exact name. Other than
mhm.
that, everybody else was quiet. They had Twitter accounts And I get it.
Mhm.
They may have undergone some trauma as far as jobs too, as far as availability and all that. But I would think that would have been the time that they would have been the most visible. You know who was the
Yes.
most visible? We were.
Right.
We
Exactly.
were the most visible.
Right.
We were the one giving the advice. Being here twice a week, writing articles, tweeting out random,
Yes.
and
Yes.
helping whoever needed help. Not charging a dime in many cases for advice
Yes.
that we could charge. If we compared ourselves to our counterparts, can
Yes.
charge a hefty charge for a 1 hour fee.
Absolutely.
There were Saturdays, Damien, you were with me, that
Yes.
had my group together and said, okay, whether it was 1 or 30, they're giving advice. Somebody was there only one thing. Okay, they got one-on-one coaching. I mean, we were the ones out there,
Yep.
not them. I just think that's a very interesting prospect, being that we also, our taxes pay for them, the workforce connections and all those other groups, to give the public help, and they were not visible online. And if you weren't visible online, certainly offline, you weren't there helping people because nobody was going out at that particular time. But I just think that shows that there's a seismic shift in the way that we're going to look at organizations and where to get help from now on, because where you're going to get help is, a lot of people feel a certain way about having paid their taxes and the organization just not had disappeared or the doors closed, because that was the only way they engaged people.
Yes.
So, all those process job fairs. You want to know something interesting?
What?
Denver Airport had a job fair recently.
Okay.
They were expecting 5,000 people.
Uh huh.
Guess how many people came?
Less than 100.
25.
About 100 people. About
Yeah.
100. They were expecting 5,000
Yes.
in person. So that shows that, if your industry dependent upon certain types of money, or if you're archaic in the sense of a lot of these workforce connections that disappeared. And
Hmm.
I understand the reason why, but I don't understand why they didn't make the shift like a lot of like small businesses and the rest of us had to continue business. And I think that's where that separates the men and boys, is that once you show your hand, you tip your hand and say, I can't adjust, then your future may be in limbo, not because that you're not useful, because you're not able to adjust. And I think in essence, that's the same things that job seekers need to learn. In the sense that even though you work in a manufacturing industry, manufacturers going to go digital sooner or later. They
Right.
have no choice but because they tipped their hand during the pandemic. That a lot of them, they had to close down, or that they had to continue under volatile circumstances as far as pay and money and supply and demand. That whole industry had to shift, and a lot of them weren't able to. That's why people go to a store, order furniture, and they have to wait for 10 months to get it.
Right.
Yes.
So I think that, again, all that to me is related to job seekers, saying that if you don't shift, your opportunities won't either.
Yes.
Right. But, I think that having worked in a what do we call it? Employability center. It was a cooperative effort between our local community college and Goodwill. Uh,
Hmm.
it was a computer bank heaven. There were probably 50 computers that were available without any limit. Yet people that were struggling to use a computer that didn't have
Hmm.
um, access to the net were going to a library and were getting cut out after an hour. And what my point is that sometimes in these situations, government situations, in my opinion,
Hmm.
there's a lot of politics that are involved. And I'll give you just one quick example. When I was working for the college at Goodwill. Not only did I teach an employability class that was always packed with people, but
Mhm.
also I would hang around afterwards and work with people out in the lab on very basic things. Here's how you get online, how you set up an email, et cetera, et cetera. But then there was a change in policy and politics.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
going forward, after the two disconnected, qualified career counselors had to sit in their office and watch people struggle
Mhm.
because of
Mhm.
the new rules that said that they could no longer
Mhm.
interact with the clientele that came in. They could stand over them and said, now tap A, now tap B, now tap
Yes.
C, but could not jump in and show them. And what that ended up producing was a very frustrated
Exactly.
group of folks who wanted to do better, but for a number of circumstances didn't have the money, didn't have the
Mhm.
connections,
Yeah.
internet didn't go there, they couldn't afford a computer, and
Mhm.
again, about the only thing that they really needed was a good resume and
Mhm.
knowledge about how to apply online, understanding that they can have a great resume, which we gave them, but if they didn't understand how to apply online,
Mhm.
they just didn't get a job, because the days of walking into a company and saying, "Hi, I'm here. Here's my resume," is over with. So a resume still becomes a tool, a bartering, if you will, whether it's
Mhm.
digital or printed, as an initial step for a person to step into a new position. But
Mhm.
it concerns me. I mean, you can't fight technology, but it concerns me about all of the people that are being left behind, and the greater the acceleration of digital becomes in the hiring process, the greater number of people are going to be left behind, and that includes those that are underserved. And then on the other end, I hate being called a senior citizen. Older Americans that have
Mhm.
never had to use technology, had an assistant, had an administrator, or whatever,
Exactly.
where they
Exactly.
right? Where they would delegate the
Mhm.
responsibility of the technology to, all of a sudden they're out, and they're at the other end where they had a good paying job, didn't have to worry about technology, and now
Mhm.
all of a sudden have to start all over again. And just in my opinion, it is crippling to both ends, because now they have to go through a whole new learning curve before they can even apply for a job.
And that speaks to what I oftentimes help my customers to know about is being a professional. So being a professional means that you understand what's going on in your industry. For instance, I work with Job Corps, and I guess I was a little bored after a couple of years, so I started doing resumes for hire. And then I started going to conferences, getting certifications, and traveling all over the United States on my own money. So much so that one week I was in Maine, and my supervisor said, "You're not going to take time off. We're going to pay you. You're going to get paid for this conference." So they didn't value my experience. But Damien and Mark, I wanted to share this with you. The reason that it seems like our government is a little bit behind is because before the vice president and the Senate, they dictate the employment area, jobs area for monies and programs. And before they can approve a program, they have to do scientific data to say if we institute this program or this if this objective for job seekers, then it's going to give us this result. And so much so that with Job Corps, they don't even have a directive for Spanish speaking students who come into Job Corps. And as you guys certainly know, we have lots of Spanish speaking people in the United States.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
And also, like the state of Tennessee, I live in Tennessee, right at the Kentucky border. So I work with Tennessee and Kentucky. But the state of Tennessee state people, when they find out what I do, when I go on post and the HR department finds out what I do, they tell me secrets. They say, well, look, tell people who are, you're helping this, because they want to get that word out. The state government, the state jobs, even before the pandemic, they were saying, they were trying to change. They were trying to come to more counties, have different opportunities. Say, look, tell people, go this way, go to tennessee.gov/careers, because there are some online jobs here, even before the pandemic, that you only have to come to Nashville once a week and you can work from home. So they're trying, but they are a little bit behind. But now the Department of Labor requires every career center to have a certification. So each of those employees have to be certified.
Yep.
But so as you bring people in, you have to get them a certification. So we do have some practitioners who work at career centers who are part of the National Resume Writers Association. But we have some who've always been a part of career thought leaders. So they are able to help. But of course, like Denver is, oh my God. When I go to Florida, their career centers are way advanced. But of course, we got the same issues that we're working with. And it definitely is people who are don't make that much money, but who are, what did they call them, workers who had to go to work during the pandemic?
Um, Critical? No, not
Yeah,
critical.
like necessary workers.
Yeah.
And
Essential workers.
exactly, essential workers. They're gonna. It's not even about how much money they make. It's about the skills. So even if you have a computer, you really need some software so that
Mhm.
you can access. And then say if you're in HR and they start using a different hiring software, they want you to be familiar with it.
But you bring up an excellent point, and I've said this before. You're if you want to, people are used to waiting for the company to train them. When really, if you really want to make substantial jumps,
Yep.
you got to take the training in your own hand.
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely.
you've got to be able to get the training on your own dime without necessarily, maybe you can ask for that money back in some kind of way if they have see value, but really that value is for you, and you can always be a couple of steps ahead in your profession, in your industry, as far as keeping up with training, if you make that as an investment into yourself. And I think that's where, and I think we're getting some really good nuts and bolts for job seekers here, because a lot of job seekers, they end up behind because they depend on somebody else to save them. And I
Yes.
think and I think for a lot of government agencies, they've done that. I know because I used to work as a third party consultant to a lot of to those that were transitioning from federal bases to the civilian, where they, for years, the government came and saved them, and they found out in 2011 and 2012 that wasn't going to be the case. And in fact, they gladly cut programs cold 2012, even after some of us even signed contracts to continue on. They cut them cold. So
Mm-hmm.
really, nobody's not going to have your best interest unless you have your own best interest. And on
Mm-hmm.
top of that, the company's only going to give you training, most of them, only just enough for them to function for the next couple of years, as
Mhm.
opposed to you can get the training and get series of trainings so that you can be several years ahead. In fact, you will be more on par of the industry while the company lagged behind.
Yes.
So, there's such value in understanding how things and how the world works these days, is that the world in the corporate world and the big world, there are times when they'll give you the training. Google will give you the training because they tend to be ahead. You know, if you work for an 800 person company that has a building in downtown Chicago or downtown Nashville,
Mm-hmm.
maybe they won't. And even if you're in a big city, they're not necessarily going to try to keep up that way because they want to put their resources somewhere else, as opposed to you You put your resources in getting what's the most dated and the most up to date training and beyond, so that you can even ask for more money along the
Yes.
way instead of waiting. You have a choice: get the 2.5% that the company might give you, or get the 10, 20 plus percent that somebody else would give you because you're there and they're glad to have you. So they're going to be generous in giving that offer.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I wanted to shout out to our colleague who has joined us on the live, Nicolette Barrett. She's with the Get
Yes.
Hired Strategist, and she is absolutely energetic, knowledgeable professional in Texas.
We know, we
Yes,
know. He's
yes.
going to be back on the show on the
Okay.
December 17th, I think it
Oh,
is.
wonderful. Oh, she
So,
brings so much value to this whole discussion.
yeah, she is. She is. Yeah,
Yes.
that's why we had to grab her back.
That's
Yes.
right.
I wanted to
But
also
go
um,
ahead.
let me give a lot of times what everybody needs is a tool. Let me just shout out a website that can be found if you go to your America's Job Center website, which the
Mhm.
easiest way to do that is to go to the name of your state.gov, but it's called assurian.com. There are over 800 free classes that anybody can learn, whether it's software, whether it's project management, whether it's OSHA training, or
Mhm.
any of those types of things, because half the battle is helping you to be skilled and knowledgeable, and you can access it on your cell phone, and that gives them something to put on their resume. So
Right.
even if you don't have a resume but you have your certification, you take a picture of it with your cell phone, and you may meet some employer, you say, hey, or somebody, hey, look what I just learned.
Mm, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, and when you and a lot of times these in the city like Chicago, they will take young people and make that training available free and pay you for the training while you
Yeah.
are pay for the training, pay you while you're getting the training, in a lot of those
Yes.
programs. So they're probably accessible through most states
Oh,
that will
yes.
provide that. We are coming close to top hour. We were just on one topic and we kind of fleshed that out. But I think that was necessary because I think people need to really, really think the way and rethink the way they go about their careers. As I've always said, and I keep repeating it and I will repeat it till forever now, job search is a lifestyle now. So just as
Yes.
Yes.
you brought out the fact that, people will have a phone and do the training while you're waiting in a line or
Mhm.
waiting for transportation, or you have a half hour, you can do it right there. So really now there's not an excuse because everybody's going digital, or they're part of the way there where you can learn something to upskill, because upskilling is something that you're going to regularly need to do, especially when you become a 1099 employee. Then you're
Yes.
responsible for your own. And,
Yes.
I know some of our colleagues will want to say, well, not everybody. Well, yeah, I think a good part of us won't have a choice if we really want to keep up with the inflation that will occur from time to time, and to keep our salaries up to date so we can feed people in our family. So all
Right.
that. So Deborah Ann, uh, you've got a podcast that you're going on, a TV show you're going to be on, or online publication or print publication you're going to be a part of. Let the people know that one thing that you want them to know about, that you want them to follow you on.
Oh, wonderful. You can definitely follow me on LinkedIn, but I'll share my Facebook business page with everybody. It's simply Let Me Write It For You. And I love for you to follow me, and just let's talk about it.
Okay, cool, excellent. Damien, you got anything coming up?
Yeah. As I mentioned, Fox was here yesterday,
Oh, nice.
and we're doing the segment is on the Great Resignation, which
Mm,
we've talked about, and that is going to air early December, first, second, third. They're not sure. They're in the process of editing the information, but it's one of those long form segments, so it
nice.
won't be like 30 seconds. So I'm looking forward to that, and I am going to be doing an interview actually right after this, talking about the challenges. This is for SHRM, the
Mhm.
challenges that
Mhm.
companies face when now all of a sudden they see the value of adults 55 and up, and especially those that have recently retired. Now they're saying, well, okay, this is such a valuable pool of people. How do we recruit them? So it should be
Mhm.
an interesting back and forth conversation. And I would think the article will be out in, I don't know, sometime in the next.
Fascinating. Oh my
Yep.
God.
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome.
So
That
it'll
Great.
be
is,
a lot of fun.
oh wow.
Lots of fun. That's great. I have a few things coming up. Actually, if you haven't seen it already, I was part of a Forbes article with Hannah Morgan and Robin Ryan. And that same article was picked up by LinkedIn News, apparently, for their
Okay.
newsletter, which has about 7 million folks that subscribe to it. So
Hmm.
that's going to be very interesting to see how that goes on. I do have a couple of interviews I've done in press, and I'm also writing. I've been commissioned by Lensa.com to write for them. So you can
Congratulations.
look forward to that. And there's another organization that also has my attention and recruited me. So we'll see how that goes. I won't put their names out there quite yet. I think I told you,
Hmm.
Amy, but yeah, lots going on. Again, we won't be here next week. We won't be there on Wednesday either, and I forgot to announce that on Wednesday. So you won't see me as much online uh, as you do the other weeks. Again, we thank you very much for joining the modern job search checklist. You know, sometimes I forget what show I'm on. So so much. It's like I start to call you Jack, Damien, for a second. But
It's a compliment, though.
yeah,
Great
yeah,
compliment.
that is this is true. This is true. Shout out to Jack Kelly, my Wednesday co-host on Job Seeker Nation. But I do want to invite you back in a couple of weeks. We have Tegan Bartos back on. Actually, she's first time that
First
she'll
time.
be on with us. She's actually doesn't live that far from me, she's a true Chicagoan in the sense of the proximity to where I live. In the meantime, thank you very much for joining us every Friday here, 1 p.m. We outstream to YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. You can always catch a replay on my timeline. You can also check out our YouTube channel, which is the Modern Job Search Checklist. And again, we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Thank you very much for joining us. Peace in the Valley of Love. We'll see you later.